HR issues can kill you. One complaint against your company can turn your world upside down. And you spend way too much time dealing with HR when you should be spending your time on making a profit. You should talk to Bambi. With Bambi, get access to your own dedicated US-based HR manager starting at just $99 per month. They get to know you and your business while providing HR expertise and the personal touch you need and want. They're available by phone, email, and real-time chat, so onboarding and terminations run smoothly. Team members reach peak performance, and your business stays compliant with changing HR regulations. And with Bambi's HR Autopilot, you'll automate important HR practices like setting policies, training, and feedback. HR managers can easily cost $80,000 a year, but Bambi starts at $99 per month. Schedule your free conversation today to see how much Bambi can take off your plate. Go to Bambi.com right now and type in Accelerate under podcast when you sign up. It'll really help the show. Spelled BAM, BEE.com. Bambi.com. Type in Accelerate.
Me, but also you. The Pharaoh fast forwards his favorite foreign film, Powder Donut. Okay, what's my line?
The only line I see here on the script is get options based on your budget with the Name Your Price tool from Progressive.
Oh man, that's a tongue twister, huh? I'm sorry, I'm gonna need a few more minutes. Bulbous Walrus, the Bulbous Walrus.
The Name Your Price tool, only from Progressive.
The owl ran afoul of the comatose coxswain.
Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and affiliates. Price and coverage match limited by state law.
Welcome to Accelerate Your Business Growth with your host, Diane Helbig. Diane is a leading small business development and leadership coach, author, and speaker who is passionate about sharing valuable ideas, tips, and techniques with business professionals worldwide. Diane brings you the world's experts and gurus in all things business. Whether it's sales, structure, social media, planning, or plateauing, guests bring their expertise and energy to each episode. When growing your business is your focus, Accelerate Your Business Growth is the show to listen to. Got a topic or guest suggestion? Let Diane know. The goal is to make sure you have the information you need to move your business forward. Thanks for joining us. Settle in and enjoy.
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. Today's podcast is sponsored by Audible.com. Audible.com is a leading provider of spoken digital audio entertainment and information. Listen to audiobooks whenever and wherever you want. Get a free book when you sign up for a 30-day free trial at audibletrial.com/businessgrowth. From MSNBC's Your Business to Inc.com to Fit Small Business, Proven, there's a whole bunch of places that are recognizing this podcast as a resource for small business owners and entrepreneurs who are looking for information on things they can do differently or better in their business. And that's because folks, the guests that we get are people who are experts in their field, and they come on the podcast, they give of their time and their expertise to help all of you. I am eternally grateful for that, as I know all of you are as well, given how much you're listening to it and how much it is getting noticed. Today, we have one of those kinds of guests we are very excited to have. My guest today is Corey Poirier. Corey is a multiple-time TEDx speaker. He's also the host of the top-rated Conversations with Passion radio show, founder of the Speaking Program, and has been featured in multiple television specials. A columnist with Entrepreneur Magazine, he has appeared on CBS, CTV, NBC, ABC, is a Forbes Coaches Council member, and is one of the few leaders featured twice on the popular Entrepreneur on Fire show. Corey has interviewed over 4,000 of the world's top leaders. One of his most recent talks took him to New York City, where he had the extreme pleasure of speaking to at-risk youth at the Brooklyn Navy Yard Boys and Girls Club. We are so grateful to have you with us today. Thanks so much for joining me, Corey.
Oh, I'm super excited to be here, and thank you for having me.
My pleasure. We're going to be talking about leadership, which is, a big topic. We're going to talk about it as it pertains to business. But sometimes I think it's a topic that we don't cover enough. But I think it's so interesting that you've spoken to so many top leaders that I'm so interested in hearing, some of the things that you've learned from them. But the first question I want to ask is, what led you to want to reach out and talk to these leaders?
So I guess where it all started, if I go back in sort of history and figure out how this all came together, is that I started a business newspaper back when I was quite young, 18, I believe. And how it got started is I was in this entrepreneurial program, and they provided us with funding to start our business. And the catch-22 was that you needed to have a business to get the funding, of course. And we were planning to start this clothing/CD store. This goes back to, I think, mid-90s. And of course, the challenge with that is it was going to be very cost-intensive for these two 18-year-olds that didn't have a whole lot in their bank account. And what we found out is that the business wasn't going to be feasible, but we had about 3 weeks left to come up with a new business idea if we wanted the funding and wanted to launch. And so we came up with the idea of putting out a business publication where we'd be interviewing other people and just sharing their stories with the local community. And so that's really where it all started. But then what happened out of that is I became a little bit obsessed with learning from these high achievers, trying to figure out what they did differently, what made them tick, why they were perhaps unique from other people, how they could do so much and still seem to have sanity at the end of the day and leftover time. So really it started with that publication, was kind of the open door, the happy accident, but then I became obsessed with it and sort of haven't looked back because of how much of an impact it had on my life.
Oh, that's great. Thank you for sharing that. I love that story. And I love that it sort of came about, it was one of these things, and that you were open to watching how it was transforming, or, how it was actually coming into being and rolling with it. I think that's a really important thing that we all need to be doing maybe a little bit more of, instead of getting in our lane and being so heads down in our lane that we don't see opportunity.
Absolutely. And I won't say, here's the thing, I won't say that it was always easy. Of course, first of all, dedicating the time to it, I don't think people realize how much time it takes, and you obviously know, but how much time it takes interviewing people, preparing for interviews, if you're involved in the editing, how much time that takes. It's a bigger process than people think, but then there's the flip side, which a lot of people wouldn't necessarily realize, which is the other side of it, Diane, which is the rejection that you get. And I don't mean that it's not the level of rejection you might get if you were, say, submitting a manuscript and having it rejected. But, you still go into this hoping that everybody will say yes to your interview. And, then you come across somebody, as an example, Jack Canfield. So your listeners may know him as the Chicken Soup for the Soul co-creator. And, when I approached them, I was told he turns down 9 out of every 10 interviews. So, that's the kind of stuff that goes into it. First of all, it's not easy to reach these people. And then secondly, it's also, it's not something that I don't think people realize how much time goes into it. So it certainly was, I guess we'll say, a bold move. But the good part is I didn't know that at the time.
Yeah. Sometimes ignorance really is bliss, right?
Yeah, it was in my case for sure.
That's so great. So what's one crucial thing regarding growing a business that you learned by, going through those interviews with those leaders?
There's some key things that are certainly, I'm going to say, I call them timeless secrets, but common elements that and I call them enlightened superachievers. That's what the tagline I put on the people that I'm interviewing. But one of the, I guess we'll say, most important ones or crucial ones I've noticed in relation to business growth would be the power of, or understanding the importance of, saying no to all the things that would detract you from your goal or purpose, so you can say yes on the few things that will actually move the needle for your business. So there's so once, and this is the amazing part. The busier you get, it's almost like the celebrity thing where at first they can't get money and they're trying to become an actor and they're living 5 to a apartment, and then whenever they become big, then everything's given to them for free, like the swag bags and all that stuff. It's the same type of thing when you're starting out in business. You struggle to find opportunities. You'll do anything you can, but then once you get busier, all of a sudden you have to start saying, what do I say no and yes to? Because there's more opportunities than you could ever fulfill. So what I've noticed is the people that are able to grow the business are the ones that can focus on the opportunities that are the right ones, but say no to everything else.
I think that is so critical, and I'm so glad that that is the answer to the question, because I get it. I guess my follow-up question is, I think people are listening, will be listening to this thinking to themselves, yeah, okay, I get it, I have to say no, but how do I do that? A lot of people are uncomfortable saying no, or they feel like they're going to miss an opportunity if they do. What are they, did these leaders have input on how they go about doing that?
So, yeah, so I'll give you an example, one that really, I guess, sort of stands out and speaks to me. And it's kind of, I guess it's one where I started using this because it made sense to me. But Shailene Johnson, I've heard people pronounce her name both ways. So Shailene Johnson, what I'll say is she told me that she struggled with saying no because, much like me, I think she wanted to say yes to everybody and hated having to say no to people. But she had a system for doing it, and I love the system, and I started using it myself. And then I come to find out a lot of high achievers use the same system, whether they know it or not. And what her system is that, first of all, she has to figure out what to say no to, and I can tell you what my approach for doing that is. But even in terms of how she says it, which I think is so delicate, because people, if you're saying no to them, it's easy to insult them or them to feel like, why would you say no to me? Why won't you help me? So what she does is she actually says, as you know, I run the business like a family business, even though it's a large empire. It's like a family business. So we intersperse our family with our business time. So let me check with, and in this case, it'd be our husband, Brett. Let me check with Brett and see what we might have on the go before I say, yes, I can take it on. And then I'll get back to you and let you know for sure. And if I can't take it on, then I'll at least recommend somebody else who might be able to help you. And what I love about that is that, first of all, you feel, well, she's taking it, she's actually considering it. And she may decide to do it, of course, but she's actually considering it. Secondly, well, it's hard to argue with the fact that she wants to make sure she places focus on family as well, or not do a conflict with something that he's already planning. And then the other side is she offers them support and says, well, I'll connect you with so-and-so if I can't do something, or I'll connect you with somebody who may be able to help. And so I think to me, that's a very politically correct way to say no, where everybody feels good about it rather than everybody feeling bad about it.
Yeah, I like that a lot. I think that is great because it covers all those bases.
Well, and the other thing too, Diane, if you'd like, I'll share how I decide for me personally what to say yes and no to, because that's the secondary part. And so this ties into the new book that I've been just working on like crazy, because the book is called The Book of Why and How. And not to give a plug for the book, but what I'll say is early on in the book, we talk about this idea of how do I choose no's and yeses? And it sounds simple, and trust me, it's not always simple. But what I do is I have this personal mission statement that I put together. So people can do their own personal mission statement really easy. It can be as simple as a sentence or a few words. And mine is simply to be the guy who donates, motivates, inspires, educates, and or entertains. And where this comes into play is that's 5 things I want to make sure I'm doing. In any case, and anything I'm doing and taking on, it has to be some of those. So what I'll do is if it's 4 or 5, then it becomes such an easy yes with no regrets. But if it's 1 or 2 or less of those 5, then it's such an easy no with no regrets. So what I mean by that is if somebody says, hey, I have an opportunity for you, we're looking for somebody to host this new show. And then I go down the list and say, well, will it allow me to inspire people? Will it allow me to entertain people? Is there a way I can give back? If it's 1 or 2 of those, even though I would love to say yes to the show, and 10 years ago I would have jumped at the opportunity, it still becomes a no. Or if it's going to be, for example, if it was a show that is just like, for lack of a better way of saying it, one of those shows where they do like all the stunts, like, run into a tree and blacken their eyes or whatever. Like it was one of those shows, it hits none of the 5 of those. So it's an easy no. But if it's a show that is going to allow me to inspire, if there's a component to it that allows me to give back to others, et cetera, if it's most of those 5, then it's either a take it under advisement or an easy yes. And so that's how I choose. And if it's for all the things that are less than 2, let's say, sometimes 3 of those, it's usually a no, and it's an easy no, and I do it in a delicate way, but then I move on to the next thing.
So I really like that a lot. So it's really a matter of understanding what you want to be sure you're doing, and whatever it is you're being asked to do has to hit on the majority of those aspects in order for it to be something that's easy to say yes to, or if it doesn't, easy to say no to, because you're not going to be able to fulfill your own mission, right?
Absolutely. And this was coming up with this was really important for me too, Diane, because that's the big challenge. I mean, it's easy in theory to just say no and yes, but when we're making decisions, it's not always easy to decide which way to go. It's just like, how do you decide which business to invest in, right? There's no easy yes or no, and there's no guarantee, but at least if you have some parameter, some system, you have a better chance of getting it right more often than not. And so this became a simple, easy system that I thought anybody could put in place, which is simply to say, what are the key things, if I listed 3 or 5 of those things, that anything I do should be accomplishing? And is this thing that I'm being asked to do accomplishing them?
Yeah, I think one of the reasons why I really like that is because I think when people feel solid in the decision they're making, then it's easy for them to say it out loud. It's when they don't really feel like they know they don't want to do something, but they feel uncomfortable saying it. It's because they haven't really thought about the impact that it would have on what they're trying to accomplish. If they can figure that out, then it's easy to say, not at this time, or, thank you very much, and whatever. Right? It ends up being a different story.
Yeah, and to tie it back to accelerating your business growth, obviously you can tie those things into business growth, meaning you can set those parameters of my 5, you could have those tied to business growth. Mine, what I've discovered is the way I approach mine, it is tied to business growth without me saying it, because when I'm doing 4 or 5 of those, my business grows. So it's still tied to it, but you can go, a person that's very analytical could drill a lot deeper than me. I've just found that when I'm doing those, I'm on the right track.
Yep, that's great. Okay, thank you for that. So did you find that and I think you actually said this, there were common traits of the top business leaders. Can you talk about the 3 most common and how they actually use those traits to grow their businesses?
Yeah, 100%. So I call them the timeless secrets, and where that came from is I recognized when I started doing these interviews and this research that what I was discovering in a lot of ways were fundamentals similar to what Napoleon Hill discovered when he wrote Think and Grow Rich after his interviews. And so that's where the timeless came in. And the secrets part is it's not necessarily a secret to everybody, but to people that are struggling for how can I reach that, what we talked about. I mentioned the enlightened superachiever level. It's something that maybe it's a little shift in something they've heard, but they haven't heard it before in that way. So that's where the timeless secret sort of name came in. So the sort of top 3, if you will, I would say the first one is really tied to that power of no. It's not the same, but it's tied to it in the sense that it relates to focus. So what I've noticed is the highest of achievers have a great innate ability to single task at a time when multitasking is what everybody else wants to do. So I've jokingly said we need to make single tasking sexy again. And really what that means to me is understanding that for every time you get distracted, it takes more minutes than the distraction took to get back into your genius zone. And what I've noticed is these high achievers spend most of their time in their genius zone because they found a way to single focus or single task. And so that could be relating to time blocking. So in other words, they say, this is what I'm doing for this hour. That could be in relation to how do they turn off the phone when they're sitting across from somebody. So that ties into the saying no to the phone, so that they can then say yes to the phone when they're not with somebody. And so they've really understood how to get back into the power of focus. And I guess there's two sides to growing your business in relation to that. One is the studies that keep proving over and over again that single tasking is the way we're designed to work, and that single tasking accomplishes more than multitasking. And I mean, you can even look at the organizations that have built themselves, like Google, let's say, designed in a way that allows their employees to single task and focus on certain things at certain times. And the result is they can work 4 days a week and, have naps in the middle of the day and still get more accomplished than companies that don't. So I'm reading a book right now called The One Thing. I'm about halfway through. I was on the show recently, and this is what the person that put the book out, they've done tons of study around this, but what they've discovered is the people that focus on one thing at a time and or the one big thing enjoy business growth over the organizations who try to juggle everything, even though we believe juggling everything gets more done. So that's the number 3.
That is so great. I love that. I have something, I'll have to find it, that says multitasking is the ability to, I think it's the, oh, here it is. It says multitasking, screwing up several things at once, right?
Absolutely. And,
Yeah.
it's interesting, tied to that phone thing I mentioned too. Robin Sharma, the monk who sold his Ferrari author, I had him on the show, and he's worked with a lot of the Googles and Blackberries and Microsofts of the world. And I asked him about multitasking in terms of using your phone, let's say, when you're in meetings with people and what have you. And he was being very politically correct because he obviously didn't want to burn a bridge of a future speaking engagement, probably. But what he said was, which I thought was so profound, is he said, one thing I've learned is that you can't give 100% focus to a person and a device. And so if you go in and sit in front of somebody and you're juggling between the device and the person, and the next person goes in and gives the person complete focus, there's a better chance that they'll learn your business and win your business, and that meaning the business that you would have gotten if you would have been focused with the client. So when we talk about business growth, that's a direct example. In his opinion, 9 times out of 10, everything else being equal, the person that focuses completely on the person versus the person that gives half of their focus to the person and half to the device, the completely focused person will win. And I think most of us, even if we like using our phone a lot, would agree, when somebody gives us their total attention, there's a better chance we'll do business with them than somebody who's always juggling back and forth.
Yeah, definitely.
So that's number 3.
Awesome.
So I can move on to number 2 then.
Great, thank you.
So absolutely. So number 2 is what I've essentially described it as lifelong learners being leaders. And so what I'm getting at and driving at there is the people that feed their mind are typically the ones who have more success. And so when I say this, you'll notice I said lifelong learners. People used to say readers are leaders. And I think there's something wrong with that on 2 levels. One, that implies they're always picking the right things to read. And, as we know, you could read 50 Shades of Grey or Harry Potter and gain some knowledge, but it's not necessarily going to help you grow as a business owner. So I changed it to learners being leaders. And then the flip side is what's really important about the learning now is you don't have to be a reader anymore. There's so many more options, like what we're doing right now. People can learn through audio now, through TED Talks, what have you. So what I've discovered is the highest of achievers know the importance of continuing to feed their mind. And then I'll go one step further. In a time where we're information heavy, wisdom light, that's the world we're in today, where it's hard to get to the actual wisdom that's going to grow your business and take you in the right direction. These highest of achievers have figured out how to become an efficient learner, whether that means picking out their sources, so they say, okay, here's who I want to learn from and I'll follow them regularly, or whether that means I listen to TED Talks because I know that's going to get me more knowledge than XYZ, watching whatever else you could be watching like Netflix. So in terms of that second trait, I've noticed that they continue to figure out unique ways to keep feeding their mind. And in terms of business growth, again, there's lots of studies to back this up, but I will say that I did a talk with a group called Junior Achievement, and on the same card was another group called Ceridian. And Ceridian, what they do is they're a learning company, a payroll company, and then they also do research. And so they shared during the talk that I delivered at the same time with them, they shared as part of their talk that they had recently done a study that that they did a study to discover that only 23% of today's employees are actively engaged. So when they say actively engaged, that means those are the ones like a Disney employee or an Apple, where when you go there, they just seem to love and live for working where they work. And the larger percentage are the people that are just simply engaged, which means they show up and get a paycheck and they do the job as required. And then the second largest, which was larger than actively engaged, is actively disengaged. And so those are the people that try to poison your company and bring your company down, or say, if they work for a service provider like an AT&T, they're the ones that will come in, and if you start complaining about the company, they join in. Those are the ones that are hard to have working for you and that actually impede your company. So what I take from this, and I think we all know, if you have actively engaged employees, the more you have, the more successful your company is going to be. I mean, Disney and Apple don't seem to struggle during recessions, and I think having actively engaged cast members or geniuses or whatever Apple calls theirs, you're going to have more success. And so what they discovered, which is really cool, is the number one way to get people more actively engaged, whether it's individually, so getting yourself engaged, or your employees, is through offering learning opportunities. So to me, this backs up the idea that if you want to grow your business and have more engaged employees, which helps you do that, provide them with learning opportunities. And like I said, that's one study, but there's all kinds of studies that demonstrate that the people that continue feeding their mind are the people that rise to and stay at the top, which is why I think the leaders of yesterday, from back in the 30s and 20s, the Einsteins and Fords, even if they only finished grade 3, they had a personal library in their house for a reason. They understood the power of feeding your mind long after school or your formal school is done. So that's number 2.
Wow, I love that one too. So drum roll, please. What is number 1?
So number 1, and this is the one, is challenging because I believe that you need to, if you're doing something like this, you need to be full disclosure and share sort of your research findings. So even if it's one where when you're preaching to a choir with certain maybe shows audiences, like I might be with yours, but the number 1, and this is by far the most common trait, is these enlightened superachievers have found their calling, they're living their purpose, they're living their passion, they found their why. And so why I say it's challenging sometimes, because you'd love to share one that, that basically certain groups, like it's just basically one that there's no rhyme or reason as to why that one is the fit. But in this case, I realize that, a lot of your show listeners may, if they're business owners and entrepreneurs, may have discovered their why or their passion. So it may not be something new to them, but what could be new is figuring out how to tap into that why, or how to focus tighter on that why. In other words, or maybe how if you are a multi-passionate person, how to have one why that really shines and is your key why. Or in my case, if I do multiple things, which relate back to my what I'm trying to do with my purpose, which is to create invisible ripples, and to do that maybe with platforms like a show like yours, or speaking from a stage, or what have you. Maybe it's figuring out what your key passion is, and then the platforms just become your vehicles for doing it, rather than having them as separate whys or passions. So going back to the original point, it's understanding your why and figuring out what your passion is, and then the secondary part is figuring out how to do that most of the day and make sure it's your true why, and then turn that into profit. So if we're talking to, or if I'm speaking to an individual business owner, then I would say they need to figure out how to spend most of their time in their genius zone, which will typically be their passion zone. And then the secondary part, and by the way, that'll of course grow your business, because the more you're doing the thing you were put here to do, the more you're going to deliver value to people, and the more you deliver value, the more profit's going to follow. But then if you have somebody that's listening to the show that maybe is a company manager or working for a company, once again, I don't think I have to do a whole lot to back up the fact that if you have more passionate employees, you're going to drive more profit. Because if you have passionate employees, then they're going to bring passion to the customers, and customers are going to like the experience that they have when they come into your operation, and they're going to want to come back again and tell other people to go back. And again, we have lots of companies that can prove and back that up based on their numbers. So how it relates to business growth is whether you're more passionate and figure out how to tap into your passion, or whether you can find employees that are passionate as people hire passionate people and bring that into your company, you're going to have less fights. You're probably going to have less absenteeism. And these things all, of course, drive profit as well. Because what I've noticed when I've done these interviews is the people that have found their passion seem to be healthier, sick less often. People want to be around them more. They accomplish more. They're more focused. They get more done overall. So that's the key one. And like I said, whether it's somebody listening who's saying, okay, well, how do I find my why now? Or it's somebody listening who's already found it and says, how do I harness this? I would say hire for passion and train the rest would be one thing. And then I would say make sure you have employees that are passionate. So that's the big number one. And like I said, I had a client actually who, what they did is they said we fire easy. We hire tough and we fire easy. That's exactly how they said it. And then I have other clients who say we hire for passion and we train the rest. And I think that's on the right track, which is the idea of getting passionate people on board, and then you can worry about the technical side.
Exactly. Yeah, I like that a lot. Like, attitude is really, really key, because it's all about the culture and the energy and people wanting to have an impact and make a difference and be part of something bigger than themselves. And when people walk in with that sort of an attitude, you can teach them how to do the job.
Absolutely. And there's a great book called The Customer Comes Second, which in some ways is misleading because, you might think, okay, well, where does that all come in and how can you treat your customer like number two? But the thought process is that if you treat your employees like they are everything, then they will take care of treating your customers like they are everything. And if you're the CEO or leader of a company, your first touch point probably isn't with the customer. So why wouldn't you want your employees to be the ones that are making the customer come first, and you can make them come second?
Yeah, that's so interesting, because there's so much to that, and I do think it's counterintuitive for people. But if they really do think about who's dealing with your customer, who's facing your customer, the way that you serve your customer is by serving your staff. And a lot of people will say that you can tell a lot about how a company is going to treat its customers by how it treats its employees.
Absolutely. I would agree with that completely.
Yeah. Let me take a quick sponsor break and then we'll continue. Accelerate Your Business Growth podcast is happy to be sponsored by Audible.com. Audible.com is a leading provider of spoken digital audio entertainment and information. They have over 150,000 titles to choose from, and you can listen to them on any device, including whatever you're hearing us on right now. If you sign up at our link, which is audibletrial.com/businessgrowth, you get one free audiobook and a 1-month trial of the service. Some examples of books you can listen to on Audible.com are 80/20 Sales and Marketing by Perry Marshall and The Go-Giver by Bob Berg, both of whom have been guests on this podcast. So visit audibletrial.com/businessgrowth, explore the books that are of interest to you, and receive one free audiobook when you sign up for the trial. Today we are talking with Corey Poirier about leadership and business and how they go together. So Corey, I really appreciate those three characteristics or traits of highly effective leaders. I'm wondering if you can talk some about storytelling. We hear about it, it seems to be like the buzzword these days, and we hear a lot about it, but why is it important to business growth and effective communication within and without a company?
So storytelling, you hit the nail on the head. It's like, even though my show is called Conversations with Passion, I recognize now that the word passion has become sort of a cliche or overused, which is sad, because I still am passionate about the word, but it is that case. And I even mention that to guests when I bring them on, the fact that when I ask them about passion, I say, I understand it's overused. And so, in terms of storytelling, my fear, like you said, is that it's an overused thing now, or at least it's working its way toward that. But I don't think it'll ever go out of style, because it's worked since the beginning of time for a reason. And so in terms of how we can use it in an organization, I'll go to those, those companies like, instead, I won't hit the nail on the head with the companies I've already mentioned, but let's think of a Starbucks. And I say these companies, there's lots of small companies doing the same thing as your Disneys, your Apples, your Starbucks, your Harleys. But I mention these companies because I think we mostly know who they are, so it's easier to find them. And so if you think about a Starbucks, there's a story behind Starbucks that most of us know or resonate with, whether it's the, what is it called, the third home between the office and work, I think is what they call it, or something along those lines. But even their give back approach and how they, how they derive their beans and all that kind of stuff. But I mean, there's a story there, and that's what I feel we resonate with. Disney, there's a story there, even if you go back to Walt Disney. But our ability to tell our own story, and I don't want to be abstract, I mean, I'm willing to dive deeper, but our ability to tell our own story, whether it's our business's story, so you talk about company, or whether it's our personal story, I believe is often the difference maker between, let's call it the people that don't get it and don't get to the top, and the people that stay at the top. So you think about a Disney who was exceptional at storytelling. And what I've noticed is, Diane, is that what's really cool is any of those companies, or whether it's me out telling my story, there's always certain elements, and I can share some of those, but certain elements that are in place. I mean, I studied this and learned that there's certain elements that are always in place in these effective stories, these stories that grab universal attention, the viral videos that we see. I believe they're all built around story, but it's important to know that there's a good way to tell a story and a bad way. And if you know how to tell it the right way, again, I believe profit follows. So I'll give you an example. A good friend of mine, his name is Dave Carroll. He's a Hay House author now. Dave was in a band called Sons of Maxwell, and he had an incident, which some people listening will recognize this, but United Airlines broke his guitar, which was, seemingly.
I know that story.
Okay, so you know who Dave is then. Perfect.
Yeah.
So Dave, for those that don't know, here's the shortest version, and he told the story in a 5-minute music video, so I should be able to tell it shorter than that. So basically, United Airlines breaks his guitar. He goes to tell them what happened. They basically say, you're on your own, good luck, and they actually even added in, that's why we get you musicians to sign the waiver. Luckily for Dave, he didn't sign the waiver. They forgot to get him to sign it. But Dave, for a year, tried to get some recourse. He basically said, look, my guitar, they broke his Taylor guitar, $2,500 almost brand new guitar. And he said, I can never play it live again, which is what I bought it for, but somebody can fix it for $1,200. And what I'm willing to do, this was his last kind of offer to United, if you give me $1,200 in travel vouchers, we'll call it square. And $1,200 in travel vouchers wouldn't cost them a whole lot, especially if a seat's empty on the flight he picks. So just the cost probably to print them out and service them, on the flight. But anyway, so what happened was they said no. So Dave said, okay, well, I was waiting to hear your final answer. So now that I know what it is, I'm going to write 3 songs about my experience. And I'm going to share the songs. And the lady who he was talking to, he said, once the video hits, I think he said 20,000 views, I'm going to send you a copy. So you have a video with your name in it. And that's kind of how, more of a joke. But he said, I'm looking at my guitar. Music's my only tool here. So long story short, Dave wrote the songs. There's 3 videos out. The first one is the one most people know about. But again, it's just called United Breaks Guitars. And he wrote a catchy song about United Airlines breaking his guitar. He told the story in the video. It was so catchy that people could sing along United Breaks Guitars and remind them that United broke his guitar. And the end result is, because of that story, and I should add too, Dave filmed the video for $150 in a small little place in the province of Nova Scotia. And that video has been seen over 15 million times if you check it out on YouTube right now. The story's been heard, they estimate, by over 100 million. It landed him a book deal with Hay House. He speaks on the road sharing the United Breaks Guitars story. Wayne Dyer's the person who recommended to Louise Hay that he should be signed to Hay House. He has had a speaking career for 7 years now, which keeps him extremely busy. And he's been on The View, 2020, etc., etc., etc. And it was all built from a 5-minute story that people can relate to. So back to my original point, if you know how to tell a story and know the key elements, I believe it's probably the biggest difference maker, again, between a company that we drive by and say, hey, we should stop there, versus a company that we say we have to stop there. Or when a recession happens, we say, oh, should we eliminate them, versus we can never eliminate them. That's part of our experience. So to me, that's the power of story. I mean, I can also, if you want, tell you a few of the key elements, whichever direction you want me to go, Diane, but that's the power of story. And like I said, if you can do it well, it's the game changer.
Well, let's talk about what some of the key elements are, because this really is what people are talking about, and it really is a differentiator. And I totally get what you're saying, that when you can tell your story and people can connect to that story, it can make the difference in your business growth and in your success. I guess I'm not sure people really know where to start with that. So yeah, you talking about some of the elements would be awesome.
Yeah, 100%. So I'll say in terms of where it all begins, obviously, I mean, there's some elements I'll tell you really quickly, because even just to go through them would take, as long as telling a story. But I guess in terms of where it all begins, of course, you need to figure out what story you're going to tell. Let's say your signature story. What elements do you share? Which elements do you leave out? So that's a part that you kind of have to, if it's your story, you have to sort of go through that in your own. But you should be able to look at the story and say, what's universal about it? What connects about it? Why is this a story that people will learn from? So I guess the key elements when we talk about story, first you need to know what your story is. You also need to know how you're going to tell it. Is it going to be a short story, a long story? Is it going to be visual? Are you going to tell it in a video? Are you going to tell it one-on-one? So you need to work out all those things sort of on your own. But what I want to tell you about is what should be in your story. And so again, and I can use an example, but either way, I'll tell you some of the crucial elements. And I can actually go back to Dave's story that I mentioned and highlight some of them. But basically, there's a thing in the stand-up comedy world, and I spent 9 years, 700 shows performing stand-up. So, of course, I learned a lot about story there as well. But in terms of story, there should always be 3 key takeaways or points. And that, by the way, comes from storytelling, but also stand-up. In stand-up, if you listen to jokes, usually people will tell you like a setup, punch, or if they have jokes and they have it, like say a theme, like they're building around pets and that's their material, then they'll have maybe 3 pet stories. But comedy and comics have always believed that things work best in 3s. Well, what we've discovered is story works the same, because you won't remember more than 3 elements of a story. So first of all, you should figure out what are the 3 elements of your story. And I have a little exercise people can take on if they want. They can reach out to me if they want me to kind of give them the video on it or anything. But the nuts and bolts of it is, if you take a piece of paper, I call this the spiderweb method, and I learned it in stand-up, but I've heard it many times since by different people using it in different ways. But basically, you take a piece of paper, you draw a circle in the center, and that becomes the body of your spider, and that becomes the body of your story. So let's say your story is Dave Carroll's, let's say, United Breaks Guitars. So the story is about United Airlines breaking his guitar. So Dave would write his name, and then United Airlines, United Breaks Guitars would be the body. And then what he might want to do is he might want to decide to focus on 3 things. He might decide to focus on the lady he spoke to who wouldn't help him out. He might decide to focus on where he was traveling and what happened to the guitar. And he might decide to focus on the fact that United Airlines, basically the staff members were throwing the guitars in the tarmac, and that's how it happened. So then Dave might draw 3 legs, we'll call it, on the spider, basically from his body, and he'd write in each section those things. So United Airlines broke my guitar, let's say. That was the body. And then inside there he might say employees were rough with my guitar. And this is just rough mapping into a story. But then what that allows him to do is he has now 3 central points within his story. So that's the first thing, have 3 central points. The second thing is figure out the universal element in your story. So the universal element in Dave's story is we can all relate to an airline breaking our guitar, but in our world it might not be breaking their guitar. It might be moving us from a certain seat to another one. It might be kicking us off a flight and we don't feel we did anything wrong. It could be whatever that could be. It could be canceling our flight with short notice. But we can all relate to, whether it's airlines or customer service in general, somebody quote unquote breaking our guitar or not giving us our catch-up or whatever that looks like. So that's the universal element, and there should be a universal element. It's beneficial if you can add in humor or something that actually brings the person into the story. So, obviously in Dave's case, the music video itself is very humorous. It shows the person throwing the guitar and the other person trying to catch it but misses it. So humor is another great component to have in a good story. Another thing in the story, you should have a hero. So every story should have a hero. So in this case, Dave obviously is the hero. You could actually say the guitar is too, but Dave is the hero. It doesn't have to be a person, but you should have a hero, and you should have a villain. And so obviously we can say, I guess, United is sort of the villain in his story, or airlines, whichever way you want to take that. So it should have a hero and a villain. And the three parts of the story I mentioned, that could also be 3 acts. So it could be the first, what happened to Dave in the worst day of his life. United Airlines breaks his guitar. Then the second act should be the middle, what happened in between him trying to reach out to United. And then the end should be how Dave's transformed in some way, or what it did for United, or what it did for Dave's career. So your story should have 3 acts. So it should have basically a progression of the character, the main character. So top of my head, those are some of the key elements. A hero and a villain. It should have 3 points to it. It should have a 3-act structure. I mean, that always seems to work. There should be some conflict or drama in the story. There should be a universal element. And it should have an emotion connected so we get engaged, whether that's crying or laughing or whatever that might look like. So if you can go through a story, and it can be a 2-minute story or a 3-hour story, and incorporate those elements and weed out the rest, in my experience, that's part of what it takes to create a powerful story.
Wow. Thank you. It's so great because I love the examples, and I love using, Dave's story as an example because it really helps create form for people. It's not something, it's not a general theory. So thank you for that. That is really very helpful.
Absolutely.
So let's expand it a little bit. So there's storytelling and there's effective communication. So talk to me some about the importance for business leaders to really be exceptional communicators, or at least understand what it means to be a world-class communicator.
So, going beyond, obviously the storytelling is really one component of that. And I'll add in a little bonus. If people are using PowerPoints to do, let's say, a presentation, whether it's to staff, whether it's to a customer, or whether it's a talk on a stage, one of the big changers for me was I watched videos by people like Steve Jobs, because I learned that he was one of the world's best communicators based on many studies. And I looked at what were they doing, and Tony Robbins, what were they doing differently? And what I noticed is they would have an image on a slide, and then they'd share a story from the image. So they get away from bullet points. So first sort of takeaway is get away from bullet points. But the cool part is bullet points don't have to be in the form of a PowerPoint. Bullet points could be the facts and figures that you say, and that make the person you're talking to, their eyes glaze over. Or it could be you sharing what I call the business fat, the stuff that doesn't need to be there. Trim that out as well. So figure out when you're communicating with people, what's the extra stuff, especially if you're a very social person, that you add into your stories that the person doesn't want to hear. Because let's face it, we're all distracted easier these days. We're all busier than ever. So we want the Coles Notes or Reader's Digest version of our stories. So first of all, figure out the crucial elements, leave them out when you're communicating. So that doesn't have to be just stories. When you're communicating, figure out how to trim out all the things that don't need to be there. This takes practice. It's over time, but it can just start as simple as when you have a meeting, take notes from the meeting or record it, and then listen back to the recording and say, when I conduct meetings, what are all the extra stuff in there that it doesn't need to be there? And you'll start to get really good at trimming out the things that don't belong, if you will. So that's one area of becoming an effective communicator. A big part, which a lot of people miss, is becoming an active listener. So truly listening and then asking great questions as a follow-up. But make sure you're talking less. So there's a general rule that says listening 80% of the time, talking 20%. So basically, listening more than you talk is another way to become an effective communicator, and also clarifying. So if you're not sure what a person is meaning, ask them, clarify, and avoid miscommunication, because miscommunication is where most communication falls apart, where people think something's heard or understood when it really wasn't. So those would be some of the key areas that I would share, Diane. Is if you want to make sure you're communicating well, again, use the elements of storytelling I mentioned, and then go to the point of trimming out the stuff that doesn't need to be there. Listen really well, ask good questions, figure out the stuff you don't need to have, and trim that out, and basically find a way to listen more than you talk.
Those are excellent. Excellent. It's so funny because as you were talking, I was thinking about one of the things that I talk about when I am doing sales workshops and things is there's a lot of things that are important to you that your prospect just doesn't care about. So don't share it. You know, you first have to listen to your prospect to hear what actually matters to them, and then only talk about that stuff. You'll have time later on to talk about other stuff maybe, but in that moment, that's the only thing they're thinking about. And what small business owners and salespeople do is they think they have to tell them everything in that first conversation because that's their opportunity, and no one's listening. So, you know, don't do it.
Agree completely.
Yeah. Wow. So I really appreciate all this information. I just think it is so incredibly valuable. I'm wondering if you can tell my listeners more about the book and, you know, how they're able to get it and how they can find you and you know, all the stuff you've got going on.
Yeah, happy to do it. And so the book itself, it's pretty easy. The book is called The Book of Why and How. And so when I say it's pretty easy, I mean it's easy to get your hands on a copy of it. So we've set up a website called thebookofwhy.com. And for the month of November, what we've done is we've done a Kickstarter campaign to launch the book. And then beyond that, the book will still be available there. So if you're listening to this after November, that's fine too. But during the month of November, we decided to go the Kickstarter route. Somebody that I follow for quite a while went that route and recommended it to me. So this is book number 13, and I thought I'd try to give it a unique try. But yeah, so the book itself, what it's about is essentially it's made up of 3 acts. So we go back to the storytelling thing, but it's 3 sections. I've titled them acts because I'm a big fan of plays and what have you. And in those sections, the first one is about your why. So going back to what we were talking about finding your passion and purpose, because I noticed it was the #1 trait of the highest of achievers, I decided to dedicate the first section of the book to, first of all, helping people find their why. We go through exercises, we walk people through, and then we even go into why not them, why not now, to try to show them that, and I say them, I mean the reader, that you have the opportunity to change the world. Somebody's waiting for your story, and it truly can only be you to change the world in your unique way. You know, there was only one duo of Jack Canfield and Mark Victor Hansen, so there could only be one Chicken Soup for the Soul series. There's only one Steve Jobs, so there could only be one iPhone, et cetera, et cetera. And so truly, you can uniquely create something that will change lives and create an impact in people's lives. So that's what the first section is dedicated to. Second section is called Thriving, and it's a lot more principle-based and action-based. So it's similar to the timeless secrets we've been talking about here, and it goes a lot deeper into how to actually take them into your life and adopt them. So the second section is really based on this timeless secret stuff, and then the third is called Enlightened, the third section, and it's based on how to run your business in a more meaningful way, how to live your life in a more meaningful way. So I go into things like meditation and yoga, running a meaningful business. But it's important for me to add, for somebody that's not into meditation or yoga, I take it from an approach of a regular guy doing yoga, a regular guy doing meditation, and get away from you have to sit on top of a certain mountain, cross-legged, eating a certain thing to be meditating properly. Mine, I go a lot more into just the benefits of just taking time for yourself and taking a break and so on and so forth. So the Enlightened section goes a lot more about running a business, like I say, a more meaningful way. And then there's a bonus section, which I'm really excited about, which includes roughly 450 quotes by thought leaders we've interviewed over the years on our show and in general. And so this is literally, quotes by the late Zig Ziglar, by Jack Canfield, who I've mentioned, Robin Sharma, who I mentioned in passing, James Redfield, the Celestine Prophecy author. And so these are quotes that I got their permission to run. They're from our interviews. And I really wanted to have it so that every one of those quotes on their own, just one quote, could change a life. So, the idea is that if you have 400 and some of them, and one could change a life, you have the potential of changing a lot of lives. So that's the book. I mean, we're talking thousands of hours put into this little, 200 and some page book. And that's why I put it together in terms of wanting to make this impact. And that's sort of the makeup of the book. And the idea, again, would be so that almost anybody, regardless of where they're at in their life, will have a part of the book that hopefully impacts them and works for them. So that's what the book is about. And
that's
I think,
great.
And you asked about how people can get their hands on it. Again, thebookofwhy.com, that's the best place to go. And then in terms of how they can connect with me and learn a little bit more about me, if a person listening wants to reach out, wants to connect further, you could go to CoreyPoirier.com. That's probably the safest hub. That's the best one to go to. So CoreyPoirier.com, and in there you'll also find links to some of my social media, and certainly reach out, connect with me, tell me you heard me on this show, ask me for thoughts I might have on certain things. I'd love to be connected with people and engaged in making things happen. So that's probably the way I would recommend people reach out, CoreyPoirier.com.
That's terrific. Thank you. And thank you so much for spending this time with us. Can't wait to take a look at the book.
Awesome, Diane. Thank you.
You bet. I also want to thank the listeners and our sponsor. Get a free trial and a free audiobook by going to audibletrial.com/businessgrowth. Continue to prosper and be curious, and make sure you go out and get Corey's book. And until we meet again on another episode of Accelerate Your Business Growth, goodbye and good day.
I don't know what I was thinking when we named our dog Kitty. And this sweetie's become a true family member. So when we vacation, she comes too. That's why we love Red Roof. Not only are they pet friendly, you also get a great price on clean, comfortable rooms so you wake up rested and ready to hit the road again. And this summer, when we rest and repeat at Red Roof, staying 2 separate times can earn us a free night. Isn't that right, Kitty? Book at redroof.com.
Me, but also you. The Pharaoh fast forwards his favorite foreign film, Powder Donut. Okay, what's my line?
The only line I see here on the script is get options based on your budget with the Name Your Price tool from Progressive.
Oh man, that's a tongue twister, huh? I'm sorry, I'm gonna need a few more minutes. Bulbous Walrus, the Bulbous Walrus.
The Name Your Price tool, only from Progressive.
The owl ran afoul of the comatose coxswain.
Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and affiliates. Price and coverage match limited by state law.
The world's best-known investor and Wall Street expert Warren Buffett once said, "Wall Street is the only place that people ride to in a Rolls-Royce to get advice from those who take the subway." Mr. Buffett's quote is remarkably accurate, but how many people would rather receive advice from him than someone simply guessing? Welcome to Buy, Hold, Sell, your single source for Wall Street knowledge and profitable guidance. Please join me, Todd Schoenberger, and fellow trader Tobin Smith, as well as host Veronica Dudo, for a podcast known to move the needle for investors. Tobin and I are seasoned Wall Street executives with deep investment experience, and we are prepared to share our advice to those who choose to listen. Download Buy, Hold, Sell today on the Evergreen Podcast Network or your favorite podcast channel.